Let's say a family or an individual gets invited out to another family, and that individual does not eat Gebrokts. He shows up at the home for the Yom Tov meal, and the food is Gebrokts.
The people who are desperate for the matzah balls on Pesach, there are 50 other weeks of the year, and they never eat them. So only on Pesach you need to have them.
What is the volume of questions that you get around this time of year? Welcome to the very first episode of Keeping It Kosher, a new podcast from OU Kosher. I'm your host, Rabbi Ezra Sarna. We live in a world where we see kosher symbols every single day on our snacks, our drinks, and the ingredients in our pantry. But how often do we think about the story behind that symbol? This is what Keeping It Kosher is all about. Every month, we're going to take you behind the scenes of kashrus, uncovering the little-known stories from the front lines, exploring the inner workings of food manufacturing, and digging into the questions that matter most to you, the kosher consumer. Whether you're looking for clarity on the latest food innovations or just curious about what it takes to certify a plant in a remote corner of the world, you are in the right place. Today, we are sitting down in the OU kitchen with someone at the forefront of the world of kashrus. Rabbi Moshe Elefant is the COO of OU Kosher. He oversees the certification of approximately 15,000 plants in 105 countries and manages hundreds of staff members. But beyond his work at OU Kosher, Rabbi Elefant is a Rav of a shul in Borough Park and has thousands of Talmidim around the world that listen to his Daf Yomi and Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Shiurim. It was a fascinating and inspirational talk. So I was told a funny story that a fellow wanted to go to a certain Pesach program in South America, a small Sephardi Pesach program. So they had on the ad that they have a bunch of different minyanim and very exciting attractions. And they also wrote no Gebrokts on this Sephardi program. And so the person who was calling up was an Ashkenazi Jew. And he said, "You're a Sephardi program. Why do you say that you don't have Gebrokts?" So, we thought that was a chumrah and kashrus. So we don't know what Gebrokts is. We just put it on there to make it look good. So I think a lot of people are confused about Gebrokts, and want to try to clarify today with your help. So tell me, what does Gebrokts mean? Where does it come from?
So let's start from the beginning. It's a good place to start. Gebrokts, what does the word Gebrokts mean? So Gebrokts is a Jewish word, a Yiddish word, and it means dipping something into liquid. And there's a custom amongst certain groups, particularly Ashkenazic Jews, but not all, who don't eat Gebrokts on Pesach. The reality is, Gebrokts is not in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not quoted in the Shulchan Aruch as something one has to be concerned about, not in the Ramah, not in the Shulchan Aruch. But as I said, certain communities, certain families have that stringency that they don't eat Gebrokts on Pesach. And what's happened, and I'm sure we'll have that part of our conversation, is how a minhag, a custom which was sort of limited, has now, like you said, gone mainstream. And what does that mean? And why did it happen is, I guess, going to be a great conversation.
And there's people who are opposed to it. I know there were Rabbanim historically that were opposed to Gebrokts. So what's the opposition?
So the real opposition is that these Rabbanim, these communities, don't believe that we should add stringencies where stringencies aren't necessary. That's really the basis. There's another element to it, and the other element is a lot of foods that are made Gebrokts are quite delicious. And now, if you're going to refrain from them, you're not going to be able to have them. And why shouldn't I be able to have them if I believe they're halachically permissible? I knew an individual, I knew him very well, who, many people eat soup Shabbos, Yom Tov, they eat soup Friday night, they eat soup by the night meal when you come home from shul. But usually you don't hear people eating soup by the day meal. I'm not a chef, but that's not typical that people eat soup on the Yom Tov meals, Shabbos meals, both by night and by day. Right. There are halachic concerns on Shabbos. They don't exist on Yom Tov. And this person told me that he eats soup every meal, every day of Pesach, a Passover. I said, what got into you? Why do you need so much soup? He says, because I love knedlich. I love matzo balls. And that's the way I enjoy Yontif. Enjoying Yontif for me is being able to eat matzo balls. So that's why I have soup at every meal, so I could have matzo balls at every meal. So now this rabbi who has a custom from Hungary or Galicia that he never even knew existed on the map and doesn't eat Gebrokts, why should I not eat Gebrokts? Because he doesn't want to eat Gebrokts. So that's an element. And it's always just interesting to fight if you could, instead of getting along, I guess.
I spoke to Rabbi Genak. He was telling me that the Brisker Minhag, going back to Rav Chaim Brisker, is that they have a bowl of water on the table and they dip the matzah into the water.
But they don't do it on the first day of Pesach. The first day of Pesach, even in Brisk, they don't eat Gebrokts. Because Gebrokts may be considered like matzah shira, like egg matzah. And there's a big discussion if egg matzah is considered real matzah or it's not considered real matzah. So if it's considered real matzah, we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So we should eat matzah by the Seder.
Right.
And that's why on the first day of Pesach, you don't eat more matzah than you're supposed to, because we're going to have another Seder for us in Chutz Laaretz at night. So in Brisk, even though they do eat Gebrokts,
not the first day.
The first day Pesach, they don't eat Gebrokts.
So we spoke about who keeps Gebrokts. We spoke about the different minhagim. What is the actual concern?
The primary concern of Gebrokts is that when the matzah is baked, you may have particles of flour that were not properly, completely baked when they went through the baking process of the matzah. Those particles are flour, or might be flour if the matzah wasn't baked properly. And if you have those particles of flour and they come in contact with water, so whenever we speak about matzah, matzah is the most interesting food that we could talk about on Pesach. On one hand, the only food that you have to have on Pesach, at least by the Seder, is matzah. But from all the food that people are so careful, and they should be, about what we eat and what we don't eat during the holiday, matzah is the most dangerous food as far as the halach is concerned.
Right.
Because matzah is probably the only food on your table that could become real chametz. Because if you have flour and it's in contact with water 18 minutes, you have chametz. But it gets worse, not better. The reason it gets worse is because 18 minutes is the amount of time when you have flour and water together that becomes chametz. If it's not water, but it's a juice, like a different type of liquid, and water, then it's much faster. So think about a case where you have matzah, and you have a concern that there are particles of flour left on that matzah, and you're putting into some sort of a fruit juice, but it's not pure fruit juice. You're sticking it into your grape juice, and your grape juice has water in it.
Does all fruit juice nowadays, the way it's made?
You have to assume that all fruit juices have some water in them. You have to assume that almost any liquid that's not pure water is in the category of fruit juice.
Right.
And therefore, not only are you going to have a problem that you would have if it was 18 minutes with water, that amount of time diminished considerably. So that's the reason that people, and we have it on the back, on every box. On every box of egg matzahs that we certify, we write it should only be eaten by people who have to have egg matzah, because you're dealing with a complicated issue in the eyes of halacha. And therefore, because of that concern, and because it's Pesach, and as much as we are careful about all dietary rules all year round, we're so much more concerned on Pesach, because the halacha is chametz is also b'mashu. Even the smallest speck, the smallest amount of chametz is a problem on Pesach. As an extension of that concern, we're concerned, who knows if there isn't some flour left on the matzah, and that flour coming in contact with any liquid could be the beginning or the end of something really serious. That's the genesis of this minhag custom.
And it came from some historical event? Were there rabbanim who actually found concerning matzahs?
Was there ever a matzah found with flour on it? I would hope not. I would assume yes. And again,
That's where the minhag started.
that when we talk about concerns and we talk about concerns of halacha don't mean that we had a situation and because of that situation we're doing something. We have to be proactive in halacha. So even if you are baking matzahs and you have a huge bakery and you're baking thousands of pounds of matzahs, and you could tell me there was never a speck of flour left on your matzah, you could guarantee it. So now if I buy matzahs from your bakery and I'm careful about Gebrokts, I still shouldn't eat it. Because the concern isn't because it happened. The concern is it could happen.
Right.
And again, because it's Pesach and because we want to be concerned, we take that approach.
So 2 follow-up questions. You mentioned that most fruit juice nowadays, we should assume, has water in it. I know there are different minhagim of Gebrokts. There are some who won't dip in water, but will in fruit juice. What are the different types of minhagim of Gebrokts? And
Well, Gebrokts begins in the same place.
right,
That people don't want to have matzah come into contact with water. Now the question is, there are different levels to that minhag, to that custom. What I mean to say is, there's some people that won't have matzah come into contact with water.
right,
And that's Gebrokts, and that's it. Some people will say, well, fruit juice is very interesting in halacha. If it's pure fruit juice, where you can be confident there isn't a drop of water, which is very hard to be confident, because it's not just that there's no juice in the water, there was no juice on the equipment that juice was made on. No water on that equipment. So the people say fruit juices, if it's pure fruit juice, it can't become chametz when it comes in contact with water. It's only a problem if it's fruit juice and water. I don't have to be that concerned. Other people will say, no liquids. Then there are people who will say, what about matzah and oil? So they'll say, oil certainly doesn't have water in it. And even though they don't eat Gebrokts, they'll eat matzah brai, which is matzah fried in oil.
right.
Other people say, no, matzah doesn't come into contact with any liquid. There's some people...
And eggs and mayonnaise?
Eggs and mayonnaise is all the same. No, it's in my family, we won't put mayonnaise on matzah until Pesach, until the 8th day. A lot of people say, mayonnaise? It's eggs and oil. Why can't it be put on matzah? There are people that if they have matzah on the table, that they're going to eat plain matzah, they'll always have the matzah covered. So when they want a piece of matzah, they'll take the piece of matzah and eat it, but they won't leave matzah exposed in any way, because who knows, if you leave it exposed, there might be some liquid that comes in contact with the matzah. So what does the halacha say? Okay, what's the answer? I just gave you so many different variations. What's the right answer? All of the above. This is a chumrah, it's a minhag, and everybody has a different way of applying that minhag, and everybody should follow their minhag.
Okay, so this is fascinating. So in other words, we have this minhag chumrah, and you're saying it's not a real concern, it's a good thing that some communities took on. How far does that go? Let me give you some scenarios. And you're a Rav of a shul in Borough Park, and you deal with real people and real needs and serious questions. So I want to try to give Gebrokts a stress test. What would you say to the following cases? Let's say a family or an individual gets invited out to another family, and that individual does not eat Gebrokts. He shows up at the home for the Yom Tov meal, and the food is Gebrokts. Do you say, sorry, I can't eat any of your food, I don't eat Gebrokts? Or do you say, this looks delicious and eat it?
So the best way to answer the question, and people know I like to say stories. I'm going to say a story about myself. Okay?
By the way, we won't tell the Rebbetzin whatever you say. So you just...
No, she knows all my stories already. She's heard them. She could say them herself. So I got married quite a while ago. I got married, and I actually got married not long before Pesach. And I discover that my in-laws eat Gebrokts.
I can't believe it.
Believe it. And we didn't hear the whole story yet. And my family, we don't eat Gebrokts. So what do? Seder's coming, going to my in-laws. So my father, all of a sudden, tells me that he had an older brother who also married into a family that ate Gebrokts. So this is a really long time ago. And when he got engaged and his in-laws ate Gebrokts, what is he to do? So they went to a very prominent, distinguished Hasidic Rav. And they asked this Rav, so what do? They eat Gebrokts, we don't. And the Rav told him, in your own home, you won't eat Gebrokts. But when you go to someone else, when you're going to your in-laws, and you should not say, well, I'm not going to go to my in-laws because of this, you could even eat Gebrokts.
Wow.
And my father told me that's what you should do. I wasn't ready to go that far. I wouldn't have eaten the matzah ball. I could survive without them anyway. I always find the most interesting, the people who are desperate for the matzah balls on Pesach, there are 50 other weeks of the year, and they never eat them. So only on Pesach you need to have them. So
Stolen waters are sweet. Yeah.
Right. I can live without them any week. So I wasn't going to eat, but I was going to not make a big deal. Just because they cook Gebrokts and their pots and pans and dishes are Gebrokts, for sholem bayis, I don't think it's worth making an issue out of it. Having said that, God has a great sense of humor. So my mother-in-law, because she wanted to be a good mother-in-law, because I'm the first son-in-law, felt bad for me and said, no, I don't want him to do something that he's not comfortable with. So she made separate pots and pans that are not Gebrokts.
Wow.
For me. And then she got two more son-in-laws who also don't eat Gebrokts. And her parents came and they didn't eat Gebrokts. So we ended up being the majority. And the only one eating Gebrokts was my father-in-law.
So you said that she got separate pots and pans. Is that part of the chumrah of Gebrokts? People have separate pots and pans also?
No, people who don't have Gebrokts don't need separate pots and pans because they don't have Gebrokts.
No, I understand. But in other words,
if
people who keep Gebrokts, they will not eat from...
People who really eat, in other words, and that's the way I look at your question. Going to your in-laws is something that you're not going to say no, and you're not going to make a dispute and an argument because of Gebrokts. But if you were to invite me to your home and you eat Gebrokts, I don't have to go to your house on Pesach.
Right.
So if I don't want to eat Gebrokts, I just won't go. So it's a very different situation. And what I tell people, and I tell it to myself and I tell it to people, what you have to do is you have to evaluate the situation. So if it's somewhere that you have to go or you should go, it's one situation. If it's somewhere that you don't have to go and they eat and you don't, so just don't go there.
And what about the following case? Let's say in your home you do not keep Gebrokts, and you have kids who are in your kitchen and they make Gebrokts in your pots and pans or in your other kosher for Pesach. Would you advise the family to kosher it, or what would you tell them?
No, nobody kashers a pot and pan for Gebrokts. They put it away till next year Pesach. You don't kosher on Pesach. I mean, it's not just Gebrokts. If a pot or a pan or something in your home became not kosher for Pesach over Pesach, you can't kosher on Pesach. So it's not like if something became Gebrokts, you kosher it. You put it away for next year. But if you're keeping Gebrokts in your home and you're having guests, you would assume, and obviously you have to tell them, but you would assume that it's right to tell them, in our home we don't Gebrokts. I'm not saying that you're doing anything wrong, but when you're visiting us, then you shouldn't eat Gebrokts. It goes both ways. Now the tables have turned in my life. And now not only do I have married children, but we go to them for Pesach. So out of my 4 children who are Baruch Hashem or married, 3 don't eat Gebrokts, and 1 does. So this is really an example that you mentioned. So what do? So I don't have to go to them for Pesach. I could be home. I could go to someone else.
Right.
So I wouldn't go to their home for Pesach if they ate Gebrokts. Because I have wonderful children, and because they do want us to come, even though it's my son-in-law's custom to eat Gebrokts, in honor and respect to us, he doesn't have any Gebrokts in his home.
And it's very common.
There's a lot of mixed marriage going on.
Yeah.
It's not intermarriage, it's just mixed marriage.
Is there, I know for a lot of minhagim that are based on a chumrah and halacha, that sometimes you have to be mater neder, you have to nullify the vow. If a wife who did not eat gebrokts marries a wife who did not eat gebrokts marries into a family that does eat gebrokts, does she have to do hataras nedarim?
Absolutely not. Because the halacha is very clear that a wife, when she gets married, accepts her husband's minhagim. That's part of getting married. And even if she ate gebrokts her whole life, if the night when she gets married, whatever her husband's minhag is, in both directions, stringent or lenient. I always say, what did my wife do the night before we got married? She went to eat Haagen-Dazs ice cream because I eat Chol Yisrael only and she didn't, so she had to get her last non-Chol Yisrael ice cream.
That's a woman with forethought, right? Foresight. So let me move on. Now, this has been
That was before I was at the OU.
This has been a very relaxed. I'm going to now move on to a topic that might be a little more stressful. I want to talk about the OU and Pesach. What is the Pesach season in the OU? How many months in advance are you working on Pesach?
The one group that's worse than my wife is the OU. Because we begin Pesach the day after Pesach. So Pesach at the OU is a 12-month-a-year affair. Wow. Frankly, weeks and months before Pesach, we finish Pesach. Because all the productions, and we have many productions of Pesach products, both ingredients and finished material for Pesach, they have to be made and shipped and all be in the stores well in advance of Pesach.
Wow.
So we finish Pesach very long before Pesach. But Pesach is very important here. It's important on many levels. First of all, it's important because halachically, as we've been discussing, Pesach is so much stricter than any other area of halacha, because in other areas of halacha, again, these are questions that rabbis have to decide. There are different situations that if something not kosher fell into kosher, can it still be considered kosher? Cannot still be considered kosher? You don't have those leniencies on Pesach. That's one issue.
Right.
And Pesach, the OU, we give hashgacha to over 15,000 factories in 107 countries around the world. But well over 90% of what we do is not with a full-time rabbi at the production. We have rabbis visiting these facilities on a periodic, unannounced basis, but not visiting the plants, sitting there.
Right.
OUP means that there was a rabbi there for the entire run.
Wow.
So arranging all of that and doing all of that is quite complicated.
Logistics, yeah. Wow.
The logistics, the checking. A company has a whole list of ingredients that they use that they know are acceptable. And then what comes before Pesach, become the Passover run, say, throw that out, because now we're starting all over again, because we have to analyze every ingredient for if it's acceptable for Pesach, for Passover. Many times we have to kosherize equipment, also complicated and stressful. So Pesach is a huge operation. It's a very important, complicated operation, and it comes with a lot of responsibility that we take quite seriously. And weeks and weeks before Pesach, we are ready inundated with questions. We have a hotline here at the OU answering questions about Pesach. We can't keep up. We have so many rabbis answering, and they're here extra hours, and we have everything trying to work, and we just can't keep up. And it doesn't start. It used to start 2 weeks before Pesach, then it moved up to Purim, and it keeps on getting earlier and earlier.
So OU Kosher begins the day after Pesach, preparing for the following Pesach. What is the volume of questions that you get around this time of year?
So we an average day, we're getting a good couple hundred calls. And I want to qualify what that means. Those are the people that called, and those are the people that got through. But there are a lot of people that don't get through, but we try to get to everybody. And number two, a lot of people just look up the information online, on the web, or communicate with us. We have the Webby Rebbe who answers questions on the email and on chats. But in terms of phone calls, we get about 9,300 calls from Purim to Pesach. The record of the largest number of calls volume we got in one day is we got 1,100 calls in one day. It wasn't the same question, but a lot of the questions were repetitive. And we have, as I said, many rabbis answering. We
Do you have to onboard new staff or open up new phone lines for?
No, we have two rabbis who all year round, all they do is just answer questions. One does all the questions on the phone, and one does all the written communication. That's all year round. When it comes to Pesach season, all hands on deck. Everybody does their part in answering the calls. And it's not just here at OU. For example, I'm on the radio every night answering questions. I'm not the only one. We're visiting all sorts of communities this year alone. I know we're going to Boca, and we're going to Lakewood, and we're going all Muncie and Brooklyn, all the different types of places where our Rabbonim, our experts, are going out to educate and answer questions about Pesach. And because we're concerned about people being able to get the answers, even Erev Pesach, the day before Pesach, we have rabbis who are available to answer questions online. And we have rabbis even Sunday before Pesach. Our office is typically closed on Sunday. We're all available to answer calls just because we're out there and want to be out there to help people prepare a kosher Pesach.
And the Rabbanim in the OU who are responding, like you said, all hands on deck. They all do their learning on themselves, on their own at home, and then they come in, or the OU has trainings and meetings about.
No, we're all trained. We have meetings. There's a lot of information. The amount of information that the Rabbanim at the OU have, not just about OU products, obviously about OU products, but about kosher in general, and the kashrus of products is incredible. It's staggering. And all that information we're prepared and willing and able to share with the community because that's what we're here for.
Are there like 5 very common questions that you wish you could just put up a sign and everyone would know?
Yeah, of course. We could tell you already. Does frozen fish need special Pesach supervision? Does bottled water need special Pesach supervision? I could do these questions in my sleep. They think it's the first time this question was ever asked. And we encourage people asking questions. It's just a little hard.
Right. And because there's such a growing population of people who will not eat Gebrokts, has the OU incorporated that into their Pesach certification? Do you have OUPNG?
No, we don't have a special designation for not Gebrokts. But you could easily identify if something is Gebrokts or not. If you'll see matzah meal, then you'll know it's Gebrokts. That's the biggest sign that it's Gebrokts. And we don't incorporate it into our symbol. But what happens is that the companies who are manufacturing products who are not Gebrokts, or the people who are running programs, they're not Gebrokts. That's a marketing tool.
Right.
And because it's a marketing tool, they'll do it because they want to do it. So it's not something that we're as actively involved with.
Do you think it's actually a possibility to have a non-Gebrokts kitchen?
Very easy. If you really think about Gebrokts, the one thing that will typically create Gebrokts is matzah meal. Because people aren't cooking with a whole matzah, or they aren't baking typically with a whole matzah. Right. It's only with matzah meal. Somebody who's running a non-Gebrokts program, whether at home or in a hotel, doesn't have any matzah meal. So if you don't have any matzah meal, then you're not going to have many questions.
Yeah.
No, that's really where Gebrokts begins and ends.
Okay, now I want to shift. Somebody told me you look nervous. I said, I'm nervous because I'm interviewing Rabbi Elefant, and Rabbi Elefant doesn't like to talk about himself so much. But I'm going to try. So you're running an organization that certifies over 13,000 companies or facilities.
15,000.
15,000 companies.
Plants around the world. But who's counting?
Who's counting? And you have hundreds or thousands of staff. How did you get involved in this? Where did you start?
Oh, it goes back a long time, obviously.
First, your wife ate Haagen-Dazs, and then the next step was...
Yeah. After she ate Haagen-Dazs, I was still Baruch Hashem learning in yeshiva, not thinking about these kind of things. And I was learning in a kollel in Brooklyn and Mekalacha. And there was somebody who had learned there previously who had a position here at the OU. And at that time, it's 38 years ago, as I said, more already, the OU was looking for another rabbi to work in the office. And Rabbi Genak was rabbinic administrator. And he told me, and he told Rabbi Genak that he thought this would be a good fit. I was interviewed, and we're here.
Wow.
Do we have to do the 38 years in between?
Skip that. But
Okay.
I am curious because I know that you are not an alarmist, and that when it comes to kashrus concerns or any concern, we've worked on a few projects together, that you are thinking about the tzibur, you're thinking about the community. You don't rush into things. You think about things very carefully, analyze them. But at the same time, when there's an issue, you're not afraid to call a spade a spade. And if this is the truth, then we go with it. Did you have role models? Did you have Rebbeim that you picked that up from? Or was it more just...
I often quote the following. As I said, I was learning in Kaila and Mekalacha. The Rosh Yeshiva was Reb Tuvia Goldstein Zatzal, who was a very prominent Rosh Yeshiva and a Pesach, a person decided halachic questions. And because he was trying to train us in being able to also answer halachic shilas, when he would get a question, which wasn't your typical question, what bracha do you make on water? He would call us together and he would say to us, so what do you guys think is the right answer? Like that, we developed a method, an approach to answering a question. So one day, he calls us over. He got a question. But this one was like, really on top of the charts. The details are not important, and they have nothing to do with Pesach or Gebrokts. Really, really serious question. And we started having a very serious conversation. Yes, no, maybe. And after we had finished that conversation and everybody had gone back to their seats, I stayed standing there. And I said to him, could I ask a question respectfully? He says, yes. So I said, we get questions as rabbis, we get questions all day. That's what we're supposed to do, get questions and give answers. And hopefully you're going to give the right answer. But usually question, if a food is Gebrokts, is not the same if somebody's going to live or die. So how do you take it on your shoulders to make that decision? And he told me 3 words that Chazal, our sages, use. Ki lekach notzarta, which means that if a person believes that what he's doing because that's what God wanted it and wants him to do. So that's why he's here in the world. And that's what you're supposed to do, because that's why you're here in the world. And I live with those 3 words. I wouldn't say just every day. I would really say every hour. There are some tough days, and there are some tough situations. There are many good days and many good situations, but there's everything in what I do. And sometimes you would just say, what do I need this for? But then I remember what my Rebbe said, Ki lekach natzarta. If you believe that that's why you're here, then then you do what you got to do.
You have thousands of students through your Daf Yomi Shurim, through your Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Shurim, your Rav Vishal. It's interesting. I actually got a call last year. There was a fine Jew in his 90s, Mr. Josh Eisenstein. And like most people in their 90s, they're home. He asked his grandson-in-law if he could find out where you say your Daf Yomi, because he's been listening to you for years, and he finally wanted to meet you and attend the shir in person. So you do a lot more than OU Kosher. You're running the busiest kosher operation in the world. How do you manage your time?
So there's a lot of answers to that question. The first answer is siyata d'shmaya. The second answer is having a very supportive wife. My wife really supports me in all of my projects and tries to take away any other distractions so that I can be devoted to OU Kosher and to my shul and to my shiurim. That's why if you'll ever see me in a grocery store, which you probably wouldn't because it doesn't happen, we just said that would be a great skit. Sending Rabbi Elefant to the store because I don't know where anything is and I don't know how to buy anything. Because my wife really takes away all distractions from me. And, it's there's one more very, I believe, key to success in general and to answering your question. And it's interesting that you asked the question in a Pesach themed program. Many years ago, I was in Montreal on business. And there was a very prominent, famous rabbi who lived in Montreal, the Tosher Rebbe.
Yeah, sure.
And I went to visit him. I was in Montreal anyway. I come to the Tosher Rebbe, and actually, my father's family, they come from the same neighborhood in Hungary as Tosh. So there was a familiar connection. And we're talking, it was a great conversation. And as we're ending, the Rebbe, I turn around to the Rebbe. And I ask him, what does the Rebbe feel a Jew should put energy into? What should a Jew try to do better? He says to me, what is the holiest night of the year? I said, what is the holiest night of the year? He says, the Seder night. And he says, why is the Seder night called Seder? It should be called matzah. It should be called halachos, 4 cups of wine, moror, whatever. Maybe Gebrokts, it should maybe be called matzah meal. Maybe it's called matzah balls. I don't know. Why is it called a Seder? Because what marks the Seder? What does the word Seder mean? It's organized. There's a schedule. There's a system. He says, what you should always remember and concentrate on is try to remain organized.
Wow.
And if you'll be organized in your thought, organized in your life, then you'll be able to be very successful and do a lot more than you think maybe you could.
So you said that you begin in OU Kosher preparing for Pesach, the day after Pesach. Is there ever a moment where you personally or OU Kosher takes a deep breath in and says, we did it. We helped Klal Yisrael this year.
We do it every day because if we didn't do it every day, we couldn't survive. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of complaints, and we got to do what's right. And we take a lot of deep breaths. And we don't always sleep so well, whether it's because we're getting calls all the time from the mashgichim in China or because it's a big responsibility that we carry. But we hope for siyata d'shmaya.
So before we stop, I want to clarify one thing that I think a lot of people are confused about. It's the 8th day of Pesach. First 7 days, Gebrokts, for many families, is the second, besides for Chametz, the second most influential, law in the home. But it comes to the 8th day, it's still Pesach, but all of a sudden, matzah balls.
So there's really a number of points to that. First of all, we know that the 8th day of Pesach is only midrabanan. It's only something that we keep in Chutz Laaretz. In Israel, Pesach is only 7 days. So because it's not on the same level, so you could be a little more lenient. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. It's only on Gebrokts. You can't eat chametz. And if you are Ashkenazi and don't eat kidneys, you can't eat kidneys on the 8th day. It's only Gebrokts. So because it's not that same level. But there's another element to it, which is a very important element. And it's an element that whenever you speak about Gebrokts, I think it has to be part of the conversation. Because Gebrokts is a chumrah. It's a valid chumrah. It's a minhag. And every minhag that people keep is very important. Pesach is a holiday of minhagim. It's a holiday of customs. That's what it's all about. So you can't just walk away from minhagim, and you shouldn't walk away from minhagim. But you shouldn't use minhagim to create this unity in Klal Yisrael. You know, you eat Gebrokts, and I don't eat Gebrokts, but you're not less than I am, and I'm not more than you are. We're all just doing what we think is the right thing to do. And on the 8th day of Pesach, where the whole Yontif, you ate and I didn't, we want to show that all these differences are not important. And they all fall away. And Gebrokts should never be used to cause acrimony. It should never be used to cause disunity in a family. You could work it out. You could work out that people could sit at the same table, even if they don't have the same customs. I could tell you a big share of the questions I get this time of the year. You know, what's kosher? The OU has a wonderful directory. The OU has those rabbis who are answering the questions all the time. But there's so many questions about families in Israel, even more so, where you have Sfardim and Ashkenazim who have very different minhagim, sitting at the same table, and tell a Sfardi that he can't eat rice on Pesach is something that they can't understand. Right. So does that mean if your daughter married a Sfardi boy, you shouldn't have him at your table? You should have him at your table. You should figure out a way that you should be sitting at the same table. I always say the story, the first Belzer Rebbe had an elderly mother, and Chassidish community, they don't eat Gebrokts. And it was at the Seder, the first night at the Seder, his mother was an elderly woman. There was no way she could eat the matzah. So she put the matzah into water. That is the real McCoy. That's real Gebrokts. And everybody, all the Chassidim that was standing and sitting there were horrified. And what did he do? What did he do? You know what he did? He ate a piece of that matzah. Because he wanted to show, showing respect to my mother and not making her feel bad is more important than anything else. And again, nobody should walk away throwing away a minhag of Gebrokts. If you have that minhag, keep it. But everything should always be kept in proportion.
What's the most common mistake, or if there was one message that you would give to the public about Pesach, what would that be?
So the message I would give is there are so many stores nowadays that have Pesach sections or Pesach stores. And you walk into the store and your assumption is that this is a Pesach store. Right. So everything here is kosher for Pesach. Right. And I don't have to check if it has a Pesach symbol. Right. And the story I always say is the woman who called me on Erev Pesach, who had cooked 24 rolls of gefilte fish that she bought in a Pesach store, assuming that they were all kosher Pesach. Course, yeah. And then somehow or another, she realized on Erev Pesach that the rolls of gefilte fish that she had cooked had a just plain OU, but not an OUP. They were real chametz because they put chametz into the gefilte fish. They put breadcrumbs or whatever. So I'm not even talking about that she didn't have any gefilte fish for Yontif and that she had to throw out all the 24 rolls. But the pots, the pans, the silverware, wow, they were all used in preparing those 24 rolls of chametz gefilte fish. The question, it was really bad. And it could have all been avoided. Sometimes things are unavoidable. This is something that could have been avoided. Just look for the kosher symbol.
We can keep going for a long time. There's so many things that you, in your position, have insight in and have experience on, and we definitely want to have you back for another round. But this has been.
You know what the good thing about Pesach is?
What's that?
They'll come back next year.
Well, so thank you very much for coming. This has really been fascinating and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in to Keeping It Kosher. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. We'll see you next month as we continue to uncover the stories behind the symbol.